Hello class, and welcome to the tuning in video for week 11, which will be tuning in to Bikini Kill's Rebel Girl. Now, once more, I could have chosen any number of songs to analyze for this week's tuning in video. For example, I could have done Nirvana's Lithium, I could have done Green Day's one of their songs like American Idiot. There are so many songs to choose from. But what I wanted to do was really foreground the invention of a certain sound which continues to permeate to the modern day, that being that of the sort of feminist girl punk sound. And this is a sound that is kept alive by artists like Pink or like Olivia Rodrigo or a number of different artists that you heard about, particularly in this week's Soundfield video. So what we're going to do is take you back to sort of the origins of all of that, of the feminist girl punk band sound, with Bikini Kill, which really kicked off the Riot Girl movement and became an anthem for the movement. So that way you can hear sort of that particular sound in its pure, unadulterated form. Along the way, I think this is also a really good illustration of the overall aesthetic of simplicity that punk rock often has. As you'll notice, there's sort of maybe less density to work through on each of these musical parameters because as a whole, it's a fairly simple sound, which plays into the aesthetics of punk, that being sort of the garage band that can just pick up instruments and start to play with the right attitude, the right worldview, not so much with a prerequisite of great skills on these particular instruments. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in to week 11, tuning in to Bikini Kill's Rebel Girl. Alright, so we'll go ahead and start with rhythm as we usually do. So the rhythms are very characteristic of punk, as well as of rock generally, but especially punk rock. You just have on the rhythm guitar, as well as the bass, a constant eighth note rhythm there. Now, instead of a rock beat, which would be more emphasis on the backbeat, like do-gat, do-do-gat, do-gat, do-do-gat, the drums instead play these two-handed flams. What that is just taking both sticks and kind of hitting just one of them slightly off from the other, so you get kind of get-dat, instead of just hitting at the same time, which would kind of be pointless because it would just sound like one hit. You have both sticks hit slightly offset, so gadat. And these flams are played every beat, so you have some gadat, gung gat gung gat. So that's more of a punk sound. It sort of has a more in-your-face attitude playing on every beat as opposed to every other beat, every backbeat like on 2 and 4, like you would typically see in a rock beat. Now that's in the verses particularly, so the drums do open up to a full rock beat on the ride cymbal, sort of more like a do-do-ga-do, with some 16th note fills, so a little more rhythmic complexity, particularly in the chorus. Now, as usual, the electric guitar solo adds a little more complexity into the picture. It's a little more syncopated. It kind of mixes rhythm and lead guitar. There's sort of this so whereas the beat is 1, 2, 3, 4, so it offsets the rhythm a little bit from just the every quarter note beat that you hear in the drums and the eighth note pulses in the bass and the rhythm guitar. As for the vocals, you have more simple on-grid rhythms. Rebel girl, so that's just all pretty 2 and 3, pretty straight. However, the line Queen of My World, you do get some syncopation. Rebel girl, you are the queen of my world. So dum bum bum, one and. So a little more syncopation on that part of the chorus line. The verses though are pretty much on grid. Moving on to the melody, you have a central rhythm guitar riff, which ultimately just emphasizes one central note of the key. So it doesn't really stray far from that. So it basically just always comes back to the root note of the key. Now there's a little more variation that comes around later, as we'll see. Kathleen Hanna's vocals are actually done, for the most part, not on distinct pitches. It's sort of somewhere in between a sung and a shouted aesthetic. So there's kind of this gray area between sung and spoken and shouted that's like, that girl thinks she's the queen of the neighborhood. It's kind of pitched, but then it's also not really on distinct tonal pitches. I'm going to be doing a bad job at imitating it, but I'll play some for you so you can hear it in just a bit. Now, for each verse, you have the intensity gradually increase. It starts out sort of more conversational, more spoken, and it starts to blend more towards shouting and screaming to the stanza's last line. Let's go ahead and listen to verse 2, which has this gradual shift into shouting rather than sung pitches.
When she talks, I hear the revolution in her hips. Says revolution. When she walks, the revolution's coming in a kiss. What is the revolution? Rebel girl, rebel girl, rebel girl, you are the queen of my world. Rebel girl, I know I wanna take you home. I wanna try on your clothes on.
Now, as for the chorus is more melodic in that you can pick out the pitches more easily. Rebel girl, rebel girl, rebel girl, you are the queen of my world. So there you have a peak on the of my in queen of my world. Now, usually of and my aren't very important lyrics, so I think what this does is just puts more emphasis on the queen of my world, the whole line. You are the queen of my world. Sort of just gives it a little more balance, a little makes it stand out from the repeat of Rebel Girl. Now, in terms of the melodic segmentation, even though the verses are more spoken or shouted than sung, we can still hear the repeat of certain motives. So we have an X, X prime, X, Y, which has the motive, that girl thinks she's the queen of the neighborhood. So that's sort of da-da-da-da-da-dum. And then the X prime is like, she's got the hottest track in town. So it's that sort of da-da-da-ba-ba again. Then you have a repeat of the X idea. That girl, she holds her head so high. And then you get a Y, something that sort of heads in a different direction. And that's, I think I wanna be your best friend. And then gets into the chorus. Now, the chorus is a basic X, Y, X, Z, which means there's a parallelism in the start of each half, the first line and the third line, with just something different that happens after each one. So, rebel girl, that's the X, then Y, rebel girl, you are the queen of my world. Okay, so that's the Y. Then you get a repeat of X, rebel girl, and then you get a Z, which is something different. I think I want to take you home, I want to try on your clothes. So that's how the segmentation for the chorus goes. Now, in the outro, as we'll highlight a little later on, this is a little more sung on distinct pitches. It also sounds a little bit brighter, particularly because of the electric guitar. And the melody, as well as the guitar, sort of highlight more of a major mode feel compared to what we had before, which is more minor mode feel or blues inspired. So speaking of, let's go ahead and talk about harmony. So in the harmony here, we have a basic 2-chord loop, which just maintains these alternating chords. Now, they're not of equal length, so one of them is much longer than the other. So you get a whole lot of that first chord, and then switches to the second chord, and basically just loops those 2 chords throughout the song. Now, what you do have is more of an influence of the blues scale, which is, as the name would suggest, from the blues music tradition, and that emphasizes more of these blue notes, this sort of ambiguity between so you get a little bit more of this minor feel, minor third, when you get rebel girl, you are the queen of my world. So that's more of a like minor mode sound, but then we'll talk about where the major comes in a little later. And it's that mixing of the minor and major, which makes up the blues scale. So the power chord takes out the third of a chord. It's just the root and the fifth, 2 of the 3 notes, which means it's sort of more open, but also because of the distortion, it works really well with the distortion to just create this wall of sound. So first you have the palm muted power chords, which means on the guitar, it's a little more muffled. But in the verse, this becomes open power chords. And you hear more of that distortion come through. The guitar solo also makes use of the blues guitar sound, specifically the blues scale. So for example, when you hear that, so those are all sort of like little blues inflections, especially using those blue notes. And finally, in the outro, there's a guitar counter melody that comes in that provides a clearer sense of the major mode and a brighter sound. This is by sort of outlining more of the major third rather than the minor third out of that blues scale. And so as a result, it sort of feels like the outro ends in a brighter place than where it began, and there's lyrical reasons for that. Now, as for texture, this is a pretty standard arrangement for the 4 rock band layers: the beat, the bass, the melody, and the chord. You have each of the sort of typical instruments playing their role. Also, this is one where there is legitimately no novelty layer. There are a few times in the past tuning in videos where I've posed the question, is there really a novelty layer? And then I've answered with something else, oh, this could be a novelty layer. But here, all the instruments, all the sounds that we hear are pretty typical for a rock band, which just gives it sort of that garage band, like pickup band sound. Now, from the standpoint of melody or of harmony, the musical material doesn't really change going from the verse to the chorus. It only changes when you introduce the guitar solo. However, even though the material is largely the same, that is the melody and the harmony, the chorus texture sounds significantly more open. This is because you have the drums going from that snare and bass, clap, 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 to a full rock beat, including a ride cymbal. Do do ga do 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 ga, ding 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 ding. Also, you have the rhythm guitar, which goes from palm muted power chords to open power chords. And then finally, note that there's a backing vocal which joins in on the chorus on the line Rebel Girl. So normally when you have a backing vocals join, they would come in on a different pitch so they harmonize with the main melody. However, in this case, it comes in on the same pitch in the same register, and so it sounds like just sort of a doubling of that particular voice, but from a different person. And so it creates a sense of like unison, but also distinctness within that unison. Next, let's talk about timbre. So in this song, the timbre is very simple. It has this sort of stripped down garage band sound, which is so characteristic of punk. This kind of gives it the sense, timbrally, of being more about the attitude that's being expressed in the song than skill with the instruments per se, even though the parts are all actually played very well. However, the simplicity kind of makes it seem like it's more stripped down and more accessible to people who aren't necessarily musically trained or practiced than other music genres might be. To be clear, I'm not saying that Bikini Kill or Kathleen Hanna are bad musicians. Rather, I'm saying that they're playing in a style which requires a certain level of simplicity and accessibility such that it sounds, at least, like anyone could just pick up and play these songs. Now, in terms of the vocals have this raw and rough timbre throughout the song, whether it's being sung, shouted, or screamed. And this kind of like pulls together this mix, this blend of the three. Even when you have the choruses, which are more sung on pitches, this is not the sort of smooth, silky timbre of Joan Baez or of Dolly Parton. No, this is very rough, in-your-face, and confrontational, almost as much shouted as it is sung. And then finally, in the electric guitars, we have a timbre of heavy distortion, much as we did in metal, although I will note it's a slightly different type of distortion. It's not as much of a fuzz distortion, which just kind of creates that like and that sort of like darker and just like heavy gunmetal feel, but it's more of a like confrontational, aggressive sound, one that's more typical of grunge, like in Nirvana, or just sort of like cranking up the drive on your amp to 11. So you get this sort of sense of distortion, but not like a specifically metal distortion. In other words, the distortion gives off sort of a punk attitude, and you've been hearing examples of that all throughout. Now, the distortion in the guitars is matched, of course, by the growls and the screams in the vocals, so much in the same way that is done in the vocals in metal, but just different growls and screams. And of course, it helps that it's a woman vocalist, so that certainly has a different timbre as well. So we can say here that metal and punk are very parallel in the effects that they use to achieve this roughness or this rawness, but it's just sort of like a different timbre of distortion, a different timbre of growling and of screaming between the two. Alright, next up, let's talk about form, and as I signaled earlier, there's really not too much complexity here. The form is in simple verse-chorus form, which compared with some of the songs that we've seen previously is really straightforward. You have intro, verse 1, chorus, solo 1, verse 2, chorus, solo 2, verse 3, chorus, and then an outro. During the intro, you start with that drum beat, clap, 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 then introducing the guitar riff, da 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 da, and it basically sets up the full texture before the vocals come in. In the verse and chorus, you set up this sort of basic build and payoff. So a verse that sort of builds up in energy and dynamics to the scream, and then rebel girl, rebel girl. The chorus that sort of has a point of higher energy and a more open arrangement in the instrumentals. So that's common in many songs. You see that ramp up and then a plateau for the chorus, and then it drops back down and begins again. And you see it on display well here. Now, in the guitar solos, which we've mentioned several times, these focus more on rhythm, more on the distortion in the timbre, and sort of more on the attitude than complexity per se. We've heard guitar solos from the likes of Jimi Hendrix or within metal, and those tend to focus more on technique and virtuosity, like doing all these crazy licks and quick finger work. However, the guitar solos here just tend to focus more on the feeling of aggression, the feeling of sort of confidence and being in your face, rather than the technical virtuosity on the instrument. Finally, we have the outro, which I mentioned we would spend a little time focusing on here. So the outro serves to provide a brighter sense of closure and a sense of solidarity, that's an important word for the next slide, in order to match the lyrics. And so what you have is sort of a darker, maybe more grungy, intense sound in all the verse and choruses and solos leading up to this point, but the outro seems like it has a little bit more payoff, a little bit more closure, which matches the lyrics, and we get that sense of a major mode sound filtering in, as we mentioned in the harmony slide. So let's take a listen to specifically the outro. And now this sets us up to talk about the lyrics. So overall, the lyrics are pretty simple, and as we said, the form of just verse, chorus, is pretty simple as well. Now, some of the themes in this song include feminism, being countercultural, of women's solidarity with each other, as well as homoeroticism, introducing a lesbian perspective into an otherwise heteronormative landscape for many rock songs, many different genres. Verse 1 and verse 3 describe the setup of a rebel girl who thinks she's the queen of the neighborhood. And there are other lines that say she holds her head so high, or she thinks that she's the best. So sort of a rebel girl who's exuding this confrontational confidence. And then the speaker, who listeners will typically take to be a woman because it's Kathleen Hanna who is singing the lines, expresses this sense of lesbian attraction in the lines like, "I know I want to take you home," to the rebel girl. And especially the line, "In her kiss, I taste the revolution." So it's clear that the rebel girl and the speaker have been romantically involved in some sense. Now, of course, this bucks the prevalent trend of heteronormativity in the music industry that remains today. That is, of men speakers singing primarily about romantic attractions for women, women speakers singing primarily about romantic involvement with men. There's also the theme of the women's solidarity with each other, and this is especially encapsulated in the speaker's line, "I want to try on your clothes." Now, really, we need to think beyond the literal there. I want to try on your clothes as in the speaker wants to be more like the persona of the rebel girl, the one that she's involved with. So she wants to sort of adopt aspects of the rebel girl's persona. And we get many more lines that show that admiration and that sense of wanting to be like or to imitate the rebel girl. "I think I want to be her best friend. She is my best friend." And then in the outro, "Love you like a sister, always soul sister." And then lastly, we have the lyrics that bring out the theme of feminism. So this is very fitting for Riot Girl and for Bikini Kill as a band. And this is really found in verse 2 of the song. So you have this sort of progression of, "When she talks," the rebel girl, "when she talks, I hear the revolution. In her hips, there's revolution. When she walks, the revolution's coming." And then that's, you get the last line, "In her kiss, I taste the revolution." So not only is there that sense of growing attraction in verse 2, but every line is brought back to the revolution, that is sort of the feminist revolution. And then each physical attribute or each mannerism that draws the speaker to the rebel girl is related back to sort of attributes characteristic of feminism. So I think in all these ways you could see that Rebel Girl is just a quintessential song for Bikini Kill, for Kathleen Hanna, and for the Riot Girl movement as a whole. Really featuring feminism, countercultural and rebellious attitude, women's solidarity with each other, and bucking trends by expressing homoeroticism and a lesbian perspective. All right, and there you have it. That is the tuning in video covering Bikini Kill's Rebel Girl. I hope you got a good sense of both punk rock generally, as well as the specifically feminist Riot Girl manifestation of punk, which, as I mentioned, is a sound that you do continue to hear influential through music of the modern day. So keep an ear out for this kind of texture, this kind of timbre, especially in the vocals and the distortion of the electric guitars as you listen to music of the modern day on Spotify or on the radio. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and sign off and say I hope you tune in next time.